Hello and welcome to the home of the Ghost Owl, and here we are with another series. This time it's focused on Warhammer the Old World. So for those that aren't aware, Warhammer the Old World is a return to the original lore and world of Warhammer Fantasy Battle before Age of Sigmar, and with it brings essentially a new game for the tabletop, but is a return to the style of Warhammer Fantasy Battle with rank and file. Now, this has been announced as being in creation right now with Games Workshop. There is currently no release date, but it certainly is expected either by the end of 2023 or the first half of 2024. So in reality, not that far away. Now, in terms of what this series is looking at, it's looking at those models that are currently available to buy that could well be expected to be part of the army books and army lists that will be used in Warhammer the Old World. Now, we do know there are new models coming, and we'll look at that when we come on to each of the factions. We'll be looking at the factions in alphabetical order, starting with those that are currently in the narrative, and then looking at those that are outside of the narrative, though we do know there are at least rules coming for every faction when the game is first released. Now, why am I doing this? Well, for people like me who are old Warhammer Fantasy Battle players that probably still have existing armies, maybe gathering dust somewhere, who haven't been keeping up to date with what's available on the web store, it's a look at what you could still buy to flesh out the armies that you already own. If you're new to Warhammer Fantasy Battle, then it's a look at, if you were going to start an army, what an army might look like, what the models might look like, and give you a chance to maybe dip in early. If you're like me, I'm a very slow painter, so this gives me a chance to buy models in advance of the game being released and have them painted and ready to play when the game does fully release. And as well, not many people are sat there with, £300, £400, £500. We don't know how big the armies are going to be to drop on an army on day one. So this does allow you to then spread the costs over buying the units over many, many months. And sort of you can buy a unit, paint it up, and next month buy a unit, and you're not having to find the money all in one go. Now, I should say everything that is in this series are personal opinions only. I have no inside knowledge. I have no relationship with Games Workshop in that way, other than being a fan of Warhammer Fantasy Battle and the lore of that game. And everything in the series is correct at the time of recording only. And I have based a lot of what I'm going to talk about on the last remaining army book that was published for the factions. Many of those will be 8th edition, but there are a few like Chaos Dwarfs and Bretonnia that didn't have 8th edition army books. Now, before we get into it, other miniatures are available. You can find, obviously, the old classic miniatures that are no longer available to buy from Games Workshop on eBay, for example. You've got other manufacturers that you can use as counts as, such as DS Vault with their sort of Crusaders and Templars and so on, Kings of War. There's also those 3D printer opportunities out there, whether you own a 3D printer and you're looking for the files, or whether you're looking for someone to do it for you. That's an option, but always remember that non-official Games Workshop models are not usually allowed to be used in their stores, at gaming tables, or in the tournaments. Also, when you're looking at the Games Workshop models on their website, check the bases. Some of these will have round bases, some of them will have square. Now, we know that they're going to be square bases, but we also know there's going to be some base size changes, so please keep that in mind when you're buying the models. And again, if a lot of times the bases you don't really care if you're just playing at home or playing in a local club, but if you are playing in tournament, you will need obviously the correct base sizes. But if you're not too fussed about making sure they're fully correct, then you've obviously, consider the fact that when you're playing a rank and file game like Warhammer Fantasy Battle was, and like the old world will be, movement trays will be a really important part. So you can mitigate a lot of the base issues with movement trays. Also, check the material. Some people really don't like fine cast, so there's still quite a lot of the old models that are dotted around that may well be fine cast, so check that out versus plastic. And if you are looking at stuff off eBay or whatever, and it's forge wheeled, that of course will be resin, so for example the Chaos Dwarves. And overall, given what we know about Warhammer the Old World, the timeline it's going to be set in, I would avoid buying named characters unless there's a nostalgia thing. There will surely be rules, even if Games Workshop doesn't do it. The fan base will provide rules for some of those characters that you might have played in the past. You can consider the timeline and maybe take a gamble on, if you look at some of the longer lived characters, whether they be demons or whatever, even elves, for example. Maybe those characters will make an appearance. But with a new game, with a new timeline, I can certainly expect that we might see a few new named characters put in. Though, of course, as always, you can use these named characters as accounts as. So if you had Karl Franz, the Emperor of the Empire, for example, on his Griffin, there's no reason you couldn't use him as a general on Griffin if that option was available. So that is essentially the intro of why we're doing it and some of the considerations that you need to consider while we go through each of these videos. But without further ado, let's go and look at the next faction. So as we look at the next faction here, we're looking at the Kingdom of Bretonnia, which is the next one that is inside in terms of the narrative element. So in terms of Bretonnia, there are no models available on Games Workshop's website. I have included it for completeness, as well as included it with a few pictures so that those people that either didn't play or come across Bretonnians in the past or are new to Warhammer Fantasy Battle can have an appreciation, one, of what the aesthetic looked like, and also if you're looking to pick up models off of eBay or other areas where you might find some Bretonnian models, what they look like and if they are likely to be in or not. But bear in mind, Bretonnia being a faction that's brought back, we don't know if Games Workshop's going to bring any of these old kits back, and we also don't know which, if any, are getting new models. There has been at least one new model for Bretonnia that's been teased on the Warhammer community website, so feel free to check that one out. Again, we're basing this on the 8th edition Army, the 8th edition Army list, I should say. Bretonnia didn't have an 8th edition Army book. When we're looking at special lords, you had King Luan Leoncoeur, the Fey Enchantress, and the Green Knight. The Green Knight is who you see in the picture down below. We've also got the Lords, which is a generic Bretonnian lord. He was typically mounted on a horse with a lance. And then you've got a prophetess, who essentially is your magic user. And then you had the heroes of a paladin, which is essentially a type of knight on foot, essentially. And then a damsel, which is a slightly lower level magic user. As we move on to the core units of Bretonnia. So 4 core units were in Bretonnia: the Knights Errant and the Knights of the Realm. It's Knights of the Realm that you see here in the picture at the bottom. They are sort of your standard Knights Errant, were those that are kind of learning to be knights. And then you had your men-at-arms and your peasant bowmen. Again, the peasant bowmen are what you see in the picture at the bottom. Both of those essentially low-quality infantry, but relatively cheap and offer some good assistance to the knightly units. In terms of special units, okay, we got questing knights. Those are the ones in the middle picture you see there. So these were the ones who were on their Grail quest that hadn't completed it. You had Pegasus knights. You can see one of them on the left-hand picture there. A knight riding a flying horse instead, and then you've got the Grail Reliquae, which is on the right-hand picture, essentially a dead Grail Knight, almost a bit like a shrine, and then you had Battle Pilgrims and Mounted Yeomen. Mounted Yeomen were kind of almost like squires, if you like, or certainly, I mean, they're not knights, but they are also cavalry. And I can certainly see nearly all of the base units without the special characters being present in the army list that comes out. Pretty much all of these units are iconic. The Grail Reliquae, the Pegasus Knights, Questing Knights, Knights of the Realm, they are iconic units and could certainly be in the army list. The final one then for Bretonnian, and as you can see, it didn't have the biggest army list overall, and I think that a lot of that is because they were kind of really abandoned after the 6th edition and didn't really have any updates. But they do have 2 rare units there, which were the Grail Knights and the Field Trebuchet. Field Trebuchet, an excellent artillery piece, as you can see there, and the Grail Knights being your absolute elite high-end cavalry. Just be aware that pretty much most of things like the Grail Knights, for example, you will find them in a mixture of fine cast and plastic horses, fine cast models. So if you are looking for a lot of the models for Bretonnia from alternate sources like eBay and so on, bear in mind that there will probably be quite a mixture of both metal, fine cast and plastic, and that should be a consideration if you are particularly unhappy about working with any of those materials. The likelihood, however, is they will all be on square bases, but please remember those base sizes absolutely may change, and so keep again that as a consideration, that maybe even if you put it on a base to paint the main miniature, maybe you don't paint and do the base up until or even fully attach the model to the base until there is more clarity on exactly what base sizes will be required for each of the units. And there you go. Not a huge amount to dwell on with Bretonnia, since none of the units are available on Games Workshop's website. Like I say, I added this for a sense of completeness and for those that are unfamiliar with the faction and its units. If you liked the video, give it a thumbs up. If you didn't like it, though, give it a thumbs down. Let me know why in the comments down below. And if you want to see more of these videos or others that you see on the channel, then please hit that subscribe button. It is totally free for you to do, and it means a huge amount for me. So thank you for that in advance. You've been watching The Ghost Owl, and I'll see you very soon.